Israel and Palestine, the hidden valley no scripture mentioned. Before the Torah, before the Quran, before any scripture pressed its ink into the world, there was a valley. Before the prophets named the hills, before armies crossed the Jordan, before any god was invoked over this specific soil, people lived here, not as legend, not as myth, as physical, documented, biological fact. They built, they stored grain, they buried their dead with ceremony, and none of it appears in any holy book. This is not a story about religion. This is not a story about politics. This is the story that happened before both of those things became possible. This is where it begins. Look at a map of the region we now call Israel and Palestine. Find the Jordan River. Follow it south. It descends through a long, narrow corridor, a gash in the Earth's surface roughly 400 kilometers long. Geologists call it the Jordan Rift Valley. It is part of the Great Rift System, a fracture where the African and Arabian tectonic plates are pulling apart, slowly over millions of years. The valley sits below sea level. Parts of it sit far below. The shoreline of the Dead Sea, at its lowest, rests more than 430 meters beneath the surface of the Mediterranean. There is no other inhabited place on land that low. But here is what the maps do not show you. 12,000 years ago, this valley did not look like this. It was not a river and a salt lake and pale desert. It was a single, massive body of water. Geologists call it Lake Lissan. It stretched from what is now the Sea of Galilee in the north, down through the entire Jordan corridor, pooling where the Dead Sea sits today, and extending further into what is now the Araba Desert. At its greatest extent, it was more than 200 meters deeper than the Dead Sea is now. This entire valley, the valley that every scripture later assumes, was underwater. The beach lines are still visible. You can see them pressed into the limestone cliffs, ancient watermarks etched at elevations that no current lake can reach. Lake Lissan began retreating around 15,000 years ago. The climate warmed. The ice sheets of the last glacial period pulled back. Rainfall patterns shifted. As the lake fell, it left behind something extraordinary. It left the ground, and people arrived to stand on it. They were not wanderers in the way we imagine wanderers. They had territories. They had knowledge of seasonal plants. They tracked the movement of gazelle herds the way a modern farmer tracks weather patterns. Archaeologists call them the Natufians. They appeared in this valley and its surrounding highlands roughly 15,000 years ago. They were anatomically modern humans, fully so, capable of everything we are capable of. They did something no human culture in this region had done before. They stopped moving. Not all of them, not all at once, but the pattern is clear in the archaeological record. They built round stone structures. They dug semi-subterranean floors to insulate against temperature extremes. At a site called Ain Ghazal in the upper Jordan Valley, archaeologists uncovered a village, circular stone walls, post holes, storage pits, hearths, dating to 12,000 BC. This was not a camp. A camp leaves almost nothing. This site left enough to reconstruct a community. The problem they were solving was simple and permanent: enough food. The valley and its surrounding hills were dense with wild cereals, emmer wheat, wild barley, rye. The Natufians had stone sickle blades with a specific sheen on their edges, sickle gloss, the residue left by cutting silica-rich grass stems at the base. They were harvesting grain before they were farming it. They had stone mortars and pestles, heavy enough that you do not move them unless you have to. Weight implies permanence. Permanence implies settlement. They also had storage facilities. Archaeologists find pits lined with stone or plaster, dug beneath the floors of structures. Storing grain underground insulates it from temperature and moisture. It extends survival. The problem? Enough food. Track the grain, harvest the grain, store the grain. The system that emerged, semi-permanent villages organized around seasonal cycles. The consequence, larger populations, longer-term social bonds. The bigger shift, the beginning of a place having a community, and that community having memory. At Shubaika 1, in what is now Jordan's northeastern desert, archaeologists found bread, flatbread, ground from wild cereal seeds and mixed with tubers. It dates to 14,400 years ago. 4,000 years before agriculture existed, people in this region were already baking. The city that had no name in Scripture. Follow the Jordan River south from Ain Malaha, past the bend, past the old shoreline terraces of Lake Lissan, stop just north of the Dead Sea, west of the river. This is where Jericho is. Jericho sits at approximately 258 meters below sea level. It is one of the lowest permanently inhabited places on Earth. A natural spring called Ain al-Sultan, the Sultan's Spring, produces millions of liters of water each year without interruption. The spring is why the city exists. Not prophecy, not divine mandate, a spring. Fresh water in an arid corridor is not an amenity. It is the single difference between life and death for any community trying to sustain itself year-round. People began settling at Jericho around 9000 BC. The archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon excavated the site systematically in the 1950s and found layer upon layer of occupation, each civilization built upon the collapsed mud brick of the last, creating a hill called a Tel. Tel es-Sultan, the mound of the Sultan's Spring. By 8000 BC, Jericho had a perimeter wall, stone, deliberately constructed, between 1.8 and 3 meters thick. Adjacent to it stood a stone tower, circular, more than 8 meters high, with an internal staircase. This is the oldest known tower in human history. It predates the Egyptian pyramids by 5,000 years. Why build a wall? The wall solved a problem that emerges the moment communities accumulate surplus. Surplus is attractive. Attractive things draw competition. Competition requires defense. The wall was not built because a pharaoh ordered it. There were no pharaohs yet. It was built because grain storage creates vulnerability, and vulnerability creates the need for architecture. The wall produced something else. It drew a line around a community. Inside, us. Outside, not us. This is the earliest physical evidence of that distinction in the human record. It is a distinction the world has never fully moved past. From the Jordan Valley, move the perspective outward. By 7000 BC, the settlements scattered across what is now Israel, Palestine, and Jordan were no longer isolated experiments. They were nodes in a network. At Ain Ghazal, near what is now Amman in Jordan, archaeologists found one of the most significant Neolithic sites in the world. Between 7200 and 5000 BC, Ain Ghazal was one of the largest population centers in the entire Middle East. More than 3,000 people may have lived there. In the Neolithic period, that is a city. They built two-story structures with lime-plastered floors. Lime plaster requires burning limestone at high temperatures. That requires coordinated fuel collection, kiln construction, and skilled labor. It requires someone organizing other people. At Ain Ghazal, archaeologists also found statues, nearly life-sized human figures made of plaster over reed armatures with inlaid eyes of bitumen and shell, 32 of them buried in a cache. These are the earliest large-scale human statues ever found. They were not decorative in any casual sense. They were deliberate. Someone planned their creation. Someone decided where to bury them and why. That decision implies a belief system. A belief system implies shared abstraction. Shared abstraction implies language capable of carrying ideas that are not immediately physical, not the spring is here, but the ancestors require this. When a community shares ideas that cannot be touched, it is crossed into a new kind of existence. It has begun to need priests or their functional equivalent. It has begun to need authority that explains the invisible. The individual solved for food, the community solved for safety, the city solved for meaning. Travel south along the Wadi Araba, the long arid valley that connects the Dead Sea to the Gulf of Aqaba. The landscape here looks barren. It is not barren. It is full of copper. At a place called Wadi Faynan, on the eastern edge of the Araba, copper ore sits close to the surface, malachite, green-streaked rock that, when smelted at the right temperature, produces a metal harder than anything the region had seen. Wadi Faynan shows evidence of copper smelting stretching back 7,000 years. Researchers found traces of ancient copper pollution in a river system at the site, among the earliest industrial pollution ever documented. Pollution is not accidental. Pollution on that scale requires sustained, organized production. Consider the chain of decisions required. Someone had to identify the ore. Someone had to learn, through repeated failure, the temperature at which malachite releases its copper. Someone had to coordinate fuel collection, bellows operation, mold preparation. Someone had to transport the finished metal. Someone had to decide what it was worth in exchange for grain or labor. Each of those steps added a layer of social structure. Trade routes emerged from this corridor. The Wadi Araba became one of the most contested strips of land in the region's history, not because any god sanctified it, but because it connected copper to markets. Copper from Faynan moved north to settlements in the Beersheba Valley. Copper from Timna moved south toward the Gulf of Aqaba. Trade requires trust between strangers. Trust between strangers requires systems of equivalence, agreed upon values. Systems of equivalence become administration. Administration becomes record-keeping. Record-keeping becomes writing's ancestor. The logic of copper produced the logic of governance. In the middle of the 3rd millennium BC, somewhere between 2,500 and 2,000 years before the Common Era, in a mud brick house at the edge of a Canaanite settlement in the hills above the Jordan Valley, a woman kneels at a basalt mortar. She is grinding emmer wheat into flour. The rhythm is slow and regular, the sound of stone against stone, the smell of grain dust in morning air. This is not symbolic. This is what her mourning requires. Outside the house, the settlement is organized by rules that no one voted for and no one formally declared. The headman lives in the largest structure near the gate. The priests manage the grain storage and the calendar. The craftsmen occupy the lower district, near the workshops. She knows all of this. She did not choose any of it. Neither did the headman. Neither did the priests. These structures emerged from the same logic that built the first wall at Jericho, the logic of accumulated surplus and the problem of organizing it fairly enough that people stay. She grinds the grain. Her daughter watches. The daughter will grind grain in the same way in a house 1 street away for the next 40 years. This is how most history is made. Not in declarations, in repetition. By the Middle Bronze Age, roughly 2000 to 1550 BC, The Jordan River Valley and the hills surrounding it hosted a network of Canaanite city-states. These were not villages with walls. These were urban centers with administration, palace economies, temple bureaucracies, and long-distance trade connections stretching to Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Aegean. Cities like Megiddo, Hazor, Lachish, Shechem, they had fortification systems engineered to resist siege weapons. They had drainage infrastructure. They had palace complexes with multiple rooms dedicated to specific administrative functions. Taxes existed, rationing existed, labor conscription existed. There were people whose entire occupation was counting other people's grain and recording the count on clay tablets. These scribes were not translating religious texts, they were doing inventory, month by month, season by season. The bureaucracy of the Canaanite Bronze Age was entirely mundane in its daily operations. It was also the structural ancestor of every administrative system that came after it. Trade connected these city-states horizontally: cedar wood from Lebanon, copper from the Arabah, grain from the valleys, linen from the Egyptian delta, and Egypt itself began to take notice. By the late Bronze Age, around 1500 BC, many of the Canaanite cities operated within an Egyptian imperial framework. Egyptian governors administered from regional centers. Egyptian taxation overlaid the existing local taxation. Egyptian culture filtered into Canaanite art, religion, and administration. Hierarchy absorbed hierarchy. System consumed system. This is how empires begin, not through singular conquest, but through slow institutional absorption. Then, across the eastern Mediterranean in approximately 1200 to 1150 BC, the system fractured. The late Bronze Age collapse is one of the most studied and least fully explained events in ancient history. It was not a single catastrophe. It was a convergence of pressures arriving within decades of each other, affecting every major civilization from Greece to Mesopotamia. Drought is documented in the pollen records. Grain prices in Egyptian administrative texts climbed. The Hittite Empire stopped functioning as a coherent state. Mycenaean Greek palace economies went silent. In the Levant, in the hills and valleys of what is now Israel and Palestine, the Canaanite city-states did not all collapse simultaneously. Some were destroyed violently, some were abandoned gradually, some shrank into villages. The Egyptian administrative presence withdrew. The trade networks that had sustained the region's urban economies for 500 years went quiet. When a trade network collapses, specialized crafts die first. Scribes have no one to administer. Palace artisans have no palace demanding luxury goods. The metal trade contracts. People move back to smaller-scale subsistence. But they do not forget. The knowledge of writing, of administration, of metallurgy, it fragments and persists in smaller forms. In the memory of individual craft families, in the oral traditions of communities that no longer have clay tablets, in the religious practices that had always doubled as record-keeping systems. Into this fractured landscape, new populations arrived or consolidated. The Philistines settled the coastal plain, bringing Aegean material culture with them. The Israelites consolidated in the central highlands. The Edomites controlled the Arabah and its copper roots. The Arameans expanded in the north. All of them were heirs to the Canaanite substructure beneath them. All of them stood on the archaeology of people who had no name yet in any scripture. It is approximately the 9th century BC. Somewhere in this region, the exact location remains debated. Someone presses a stylus into wet clay, or a reed pen into papyrus, or a chisel into plaster. The earliest known alphabetic inscriptions in the Levant date to around this period. The alphabet itself, the system that eventually produced Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, Latin, and every script descended from them originated among Semitic-speaking peoples in this region, likely derived from Egyptian hieroglyphic principles, but fundamentally restructured. The alphabet is not about literature. It is simpler than that. It is a compression technology. Egyptian hieroglyphics required years to master. Cuneiform required years. An alphabet of 22 symbols can be taught in weeks. When literacy becomes accessible, knowledge escapes the administrative class. It moves into religious communities, into trading families, into anyone willing to learn it. This is the moment, extended over generations, when the valley begins speaking for itself. The first Hebrew texts emerge. The oral traditions of these hill communities are written down. Stories that had circulated for centuries gain a fixed form. And in gaining that form, they select. They choose which rivers matter, which cities matter, which people matter. The valley before 3000 BC, the valley of Lake Lissan's recession, of the Natufian villages, of the first wall at Jericho, does not appear in these texts. It is not suppressed, it is simply older than the memory these texts could hold. The Assyrians absorbed the northern kingdom. The Babylonians took the south, destroyed the Jerusalem temple, and deported a substantial population to Mesopotamia. But deportation moved culture as much as it broke it. In Babylon, the scribal traditions of the Levant encountered the most sophisticated administrative and literary culture in the world at that time. The Gilgamesh epic, with its flood story, its questioning of mortality, entered the intellectual environment of Levantine scribes. Scholars debate how much this contact shaped the final compilation of what became the Hebrew Bible. What is not debated is that the texts were substantially edited and organized during or shortly after this Babylonian period. The valley's knowledge did not die in exile, it was revised in exile. Then the Persians absorbed Babylon, and the Persian king Cyrus permitted the exiled communities to return. This was not generosity, it was administration. Smaller communities managing their own affairs reduced the burden on imperial governance. The Greeks came after the Persians with Alexander. Hellenistic culture settled into the cities of the valley, gymnasium culture, philosophical schools, the Greek language layering itself over Aramaic. Then Rome. Rome built aqueducts in this valley. One of the Wadi Kelt aqueducts, still traceable in parts of its channel, dates to the Roman period. Rome needed water for its garrisons, its baths, its administrative centers. Rome also built roads, and roads connect everything. The ideas that had developed in this valley over 15,000 years, the grain-based settlement systems, the administrative hierarchies, the legal codes, the monotheistic theology, began moving west along Roman roads. Christianity reached Rome within decades of its origin in this valley. Within 3 centuries, it was the Roman Empire's official religion. Within 1,000 years, it had restructured the intellectual and political architecture of Europe. Islam emerged in the 7th century AD, drawing on the same theological inheritance, the same valley's tradition of monotheism, prophecy, and sacred text. Within a century of the Prophet Muhammad's death, the Islamic Caliphate controlled the entire ancient Near East, North Africa, Spain, and Central Asia. The valley did not stop producing consequences. In the winter of 1946 or 1947, accounts differ, a Bedouin shepherd boy from the Ta'amari tribe was looking for a lost goat on the cliffs above the Dead Sea. He threw a stone into a cave. He heard pottery shatter. Inside were clay jars. Inside the jars were linen-wrapped manuscripts. They had been placed there roughly 2,000 years earlier by a Jewish community living at a settlement called Qumran on the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea Scrolls are the oldest known manuscripts of the Hebrew Bible, older by 1,000 years than any previously known copy. But the scrolls are also something else. They are evidence that in the 1st and 2nd centuries BC, a community chose this valley, specifically this low, difficult, salt-edged corridor, as the place to preserve what they believed mattered most. They chose the valley because it was dry. The Dead Sea region has almost zero humidity. Organic material survives here that would decompose almost anywhere else on Earth. The valley preserved the scrolls preserved the knowledge. But the knowledge itself, the texts inside those clay jars, was not born in those caves. It came from 15,000 years of people living in this valley and responding to its problems. Grain storage became agricultural theology. Water management became covenant law. The hierarchy of the Canaanite city-state became the administrative structure of the temple. The trade ethics of the Araba copper routes became commercial law. The cave did not create the texts, the valley did. Here is what the arguments over this land rarely include. Before there was an Israel, before there was a Palestine, before there was a Canaan or an Egypt or a Babylon, there was a lake receding into a valley, and people followed the water down. They built small things first, round walls, underground storage. Then they built larger things, towers, city gates, plaster floors. Then they built invisible things, hierarchies, law, theology. None of it arrived complete. None of it arrived from outside. All of it accumulated through the specific problem solving of people living in a specific place, a valley with a spring, a valley with copper in its walls, a valley dry enough to preserve what was placed inside it. The prophets who named this land did not create it. The armies who claimed it did not build it. The texts that defined it did not predate it. They all inherited it. Every tradition that calls this land sacred stands on the subsurface of 15,000 years of people who knew nothing of that tradition, who built everything it required to exist, and who left their evidence in stone, in bone, in ancient sickle gloss pressed into basalt. Now, the shape of inheritance. Every monotheistic claim to this valley rests on text. Every text rests on literacy. Literacy in this region rests on the alphabet. The alphabet rests on the administrative needs of Bronze Age cities. Those cities rested on grain surpluses. The grain surpluses rested on the tools the Natufians built beside a receding lake. The lake rested in a rift that formed millions of years before any human arrived to stand beside it. This is not a small chain. It is the actual structure beneath the arguments. The Natufian woman grinding grain at Ain Ghazal did not know she was building a chain that would end in 3 global religions. The scribe counting copper ingots at Faynan did not know his work would produce the logic of commercial ethics. The builder pressing mud bricks at Jericho's tower did not know he was constructing the conceptual ancestor of every city wall every civilization would later claim or contest. They were solving immediate problems. The consequences were not immediate, but they were real, and they are still moving. Now, what remains? Walk into the Wadi Kelt today. It cuts east from Jerusalem toward Jericho, a deep limestone gorge, dry in summer, threading with water in winter. The walls rise 150 meters on either side. St. George's Monastery clings to the cliff face, built in the 5th century AD, a structure that has functioned without interruption for 1,500 years. But the walls of the wadi are older than any monastery. The limestone was deposited in a shallow sea 50 to 100 million years ago. The gorge was cut by water over the last 2 million. The first human feet that walked through it left no name behind. The wadi does not appear by name in the Torah. It is there, It is the physical corridor connecting Jerusalem to Jericho, two cities that Scripture mentions extensively. But the Wadi itself, the actual ground, the actual path, the actual stone, goes unnamed. Most of what built this world goes unnamed. The Natufian communities who made the first bread, the engineers who designed Jericho's tower, the copper smelters of Faynan who poisoned a river 7,000 years ago learning something new, the scribes who counted grain in Canaanite palace economies, the women who transmitted agricultural knowledge through household practice for 10,000 years before any written record preserved it. They are not in the scriptures, they are in the ground, and the ground does not argue. If you want more stories like this, subscribe. The valley was here before the words. The words never quite caught up.